Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. So today I'm very pleased to have on Matt Karamazov. And I found him on Instagram just on my, the explore page at like the Reels button. I typically do that just to find interesting people. The algorithm kind of knows me pretty well, I guess. And so I found a video of him talking about just book recommendations, books that he would recommend to anyone. And I was like, huh. And I looked at his page, and he said that he's read over 1,000 books in the last 10 years. And I found that to be an amazing accomplishment because it seems like most people these days don't even really read. They're on TikTok and they're scrolling and they're not reading. So yeah, I'm excited to have Matt on and to talk about books.
Right on. Well, thanks very much for having me. I use the Explore page a lot. I mean, there's so many great accounts, like fascinating people, and just people who just love books. I mean, and want to talk about them, and who love talking about them. You can find your people.
Totally. So yeah, man, like what first got you interested in reading, and then also the recording of your readings, like the journaling and kind of the breaking down what you read?
Sure. Yeah. See, I can't take any credit for my for learning how to read. Of course, I mean, I can take some. I mean, I learned how to do it myself, but it was always my parents who invested heavily in my education, and even when I was a little bit behind when I first started reading. Like there were words that I couldn't get, and I was actually upset with my own mother one time, and I was really upset that she could read and I couldn't. And she said, "Well, if you want to learn to read, we will make an extra effort, and we're gonna make that happen." And so both my parents, they put me into like extra reading like classes, and this was at a very, very young age too. So they supported me the whole way. And one of the really fascinating and really sad thing that I point out a lot, it stuck with me. I first read it in the book Reader Come Home by Marianne Wolfe. And apparently in the United States, the National Bureau or Federal Bureau of Prisons uses fourth grade reading statistics to predict how many prison beds they're going to need in the future. So they can tell by the reading level of fourth graders, like how good they are at reading, whether it's likely that they're going to end up in prison. Like they track other things too, of course, but that's one of the things that they track, and apparently it works because that's one of the things they use. So thankfully I'm in no danger of going to prison anytime soon, but it just in that window, the childhood window, it's so incredibly important. And people who come from houses, like homes where the parents don't read or like don't read to their children, they will, or even don't speak to their children often enough, just spend enough time with them as a parent-child, they will hear millions fewer words than children in other homes. And if you hear a million fewer words before you enter school, you're going to be at a major disadvantage when you get there. So that was really important, and both my parents supported me with my reading. But I really like you alluded to earlier, I didn't really get serious about it until about 2014, and that's when I started counting how many books that I had finished. And so number one was Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, one of my favorite books. It's really, really good. It kind of has a way of sticking with you. But then it was the first more difficult book that I had read in a little while. And after finishing it, it was a very strong sense of accomplishment. Like this was pretty hard to do. I mean, and like but I stuck it out. Like I forget how many pages it is, 500 pages. But I handled it. I got to the end, and it's like, what else can I do? And then I just started moving on. So that's how it first started.
Man, that's interesting. Yeah, the Crime and Punishment one, it's a deep one. That was one of my first books that I read seriously as well. That's kind of interesting.
No way.
Very cool. So yeah, you say Crime and Punishment was one of the first books that you read more seriously. Do you have a feeling or an inkling of why that book might have been the one to jumpstart you into the deeper diving, into like recording your thoughts? Like, what about Crime and Punishment do you think was so interesting to you?
Well, I think, it probably launched a lot of people
sure.
down that path. I mean, if you take that book seriously, it's one that, causes you to, causes a lot of introspection, as you well know. And it was a confidence building book for me, absolutely. And then I moved on to, I think the next one after that, it was The Power of Now, I think, by Eckhart Tolle. Another good book. But then I think the third one, or the third one after that, or third one from the beginning, was The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Another really, really good book. I read almost everything that he's written except the 33 Strategies of War, which I haven't read yet. But anyway, so I'm reading the 48 Laws, and there's so much fantastic stuff in there, and I knew that I would never have like any hope of remembering everything that I wanted to retain from this book. So I was like, man, I gotta put down more notes. And and at this time in my life, I was, I had just, in the middle of or right after one business failure and right before another business failure. So I was working overnight. Usually it was about 12-hour shifts. I was working as an overnight security guard, and this is like minimum wage work. 12-hour shifts, pretty much by myself a lot. I worked at a hospital later on, but these 12 hours, I made excellent use of most of those hours. So many of them were spent reading. And I would take, these fantastic books like 48 Laws of Power, and it would allow me, on a good night when I wouldn't have to do any work really, which was most nights, I'd get, between 8, 9, sometimes 10 hours of reading done just overnight, and I'd get paid for this. So it was the perfect situation. And it was the 48 Laws of Power where I kept taking notes, and I don't know how many pages of notes that I have. There are books that I have more notes than I do for that, but just pages and pages. And that really sort of got me going. And then from that point onwards, I sort of had sparse little notes from Crime and Punishment and Power of Now. But really from that time forward, I started taking notes on everything. And now 1,200 plus books later, I think I finished my 1,208th just recently. This was like 10 years. I have complete detailed notes on all of those books. And what I do, I put them up in Google Drive, and they're completely searchable. So even if I have a fragment of something that I'm trying to remember, or somebody's name that I knew it was mentioned in some book by some author, I just type it in, and I can find it within minutes and sometimes seconds. So that really kind of got me started. And now most books I take notes on everything.
That's awesome. And when you're taking these notes, are they like physical pen and paper style notes, or like you said, you're typing right into a Google Doc, or?
Yeah, so I use my phone a lot. And it's easier when I'm reading an ebook or something, or even an audiobook. So I'll use my notes app on my phone, and so I won't dive too deep into my process here, but I basically to stop or to not interrupt the flow of my reading, I just mark the page of where I want, especially if it's a longer passage. Sometimes I copy out, like paragraphs of text, right? Sure. So I don't want to sit there texting a paragraph when I'm going to be reading. So I mark which page it's on and the first couple of words. And sometimes if I'm reading a physical book, I'll mark where it is on the page. So if it's at the very bottom, or it starts at one of the very last words on the page and it leads into the next page, I'll just write, page number, very last, and then the first couple of words that it starts with. And then when I go back to that physical book, I go to that page, go to that part of the page, and type it out in my notes on my computer. And then that is searchable.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you do a lot of, like you said, maybe ebook reading or audiobook reading, or like what's your favorite strategy? Like opening up a real book? Or?
Yeah, tons. There's nothing. I mean, I'm sure you feel much the same way. I mean, there's nothing like holding a physical book. It's a special feeling. As convenient as ebooks are and audiobooks are, I'm not going to give those up anytime soon, but I have to, touch a physical book at least once a day. Okay. I can't not do that. But that being said, like sometimes, I'm reading Don Quixote right now. It's like 900 pages, which is really funny, really funny book, by the way. Like 400 years later, the jokes still stand up. but it's it's a little heavy to be carrying around. So I'll have books on my phone. So I've got favorite book apps, like the ones that everybody uses, like iBooks. I have that. There's one called Scribd. They call it like Netflix for books. I think it's like $15 a month or something like that, or $12, and it's it'll suggest things to suggest books to you. And I found some favorite books on there. One was The Outsider by Colin Wilson, and I had no idea who this guy was, what the book was about, and it suggested that I read this book, and it's one of my new favorite books.
Man,
So ebooks, man, I'm a convert. And then of course, like when there's I'm washing dishes or just on the treadmill at the gym, like lighter cardio, just audiobooks going, So you can turn your car into a classroom. Yes. I know that's like one of the self-improvement type phrases that people use. So it's totally true.
So yeah, it seems like the answer is all of the above, depending on the scenario, and
yeah,
don't
exactly.
Stop reading.
What I find convenient about ebooks is that you can more easily hold your coffee at the same time. So, phone, coffee, usually how you'll find me.
Fair enough. Man, that's interesting. And, like, is there ever a period of time where you're like, man, I want to reread this book? Like, do you do this ever?
I do, but not as often as I like. It's one of those things that I definitely see the value of. Absolutely. I mean, even like a book you've read 10 years ago, or like even a book you've read twice 10 years ago, you're 10 years older. You've read however many new books, you've had however many new experiences. You are a completely different person, and you will experience that same book in a totally different way. That being said, I get that. I don't reread a lot of books, and not because I don't see the value in it. It's just that I always feel like there's so many great books out there that I'm not reading. So it's like I always want to get to the next one. So it's the eternal struggle, that tension between the new and the old,
Yeah, I totally see both sides. Like I've seen quotes like maybe on Instagram or just in general where this guy's like, I would rather read 10 books 100 times than 1,000 books once. And then I'm like, I don't know exactly where I stand, because like I see totally both sides, but I think I agree with your side more, which is like there's so much out there to learn. Let's just keep parsing through more and more, and let's keep the nuggets, if possible, on our way. But like, do you ever find it like, I don't know, how much room does a brain have for information? Like, do you ever feel like, man, as I'm reading this book, I'm going to be squeezing out some information in the back end? Or do you feel like, well, with the note taking, I bet it's easier to kind of keep it in your brain. And of course, you can always reference the docs. So I guess the main question is like, how, like, do you feel like you're able to retain quite a bit of the information, or do you feel like you sometimes need a refresher quite often?
Yeah, I do. And a note on rereading books. One of an author I've read several books by, Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
He says that he's read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius more than 100 times. And I don't see that as, like, I don't think that's crazy. I think that's perfectly reasonable. It's a great book. If there weren't 100 other books that I wanted to read, I could do that. But no, I agree. Yeah, you're definitely you're not going to retain everything. Just know that going in. I think it's best to externalize your memory as much as possible, and you don't have to remember facts and dates and things that you can just look up. Totally. It's more ideas, things that are sort of more intangible, that are you can't they're less concrete. Ideas, ways of seeing the world, sort of filters to look on reality, I guess, that you can't just look up on Wikipedia, and those are the things you have to really sort of remember. And that's where notes can help, just, sort of jot down your ideas. But actually, on that thought, I know for sure that, most people are not using anything close to the full capacity of their mind. And I've gotten further in that respect than I used to be. I use more of my, potential than I ever have before. I push myself really hard, but most people just do not. I don't think worrying about you're being able to store more information is anything for people to worry about. You can always you can always do more. And even better, like we remember things by how they associate and attach to other things. And so if you can sort of associate one new thing that you're learning with something that you already know, that's going to be stickier in your mind too. So it's better to have this base of knowledge to work on, and it's stickier for when you come across new stuff. So
fair enough. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's like I find myself, one of my favorite strategies is like, as I'm reading, just take notes and like what are like you were saying, it's like dates you can look up, but like what are some things that I can like integrate into my life? Is that kind of how you sometimes take notes, where it's like, okay, what's something from this book that I can use right now, and I can use it tomorrow, and I can use it the next day, and it can like maybe add to my character as a man, or add to my character as a human? Like I feel like that's like, sometimes that's like, I have a way smaller list of books that I've read. Like a lot of them are audiobooks, but like there's like some where it's like, man, I can go back. Oh, I don't exactly know all the examples and the specific details, but it's like I can just see the storyline as like as a way to like, you know, aim towards in my life. Like, oh, this character I want to be like because of this, or this story reminds me of the importance of that. And yeah, like I'm totally with you. It's really cool.
Absolutely, and it's best if you can like apply something immediately, and that way it's going to be better retained, and especially if it's more nonfiction or like, you know, business oriented. Sure. Or like self-improvement. Like there are things, you know, like on every single page of some books that you can apply immediately, and even like one of the books I'm reading now, it's like a really sort of intense time management book. There's stuff that sometimes it doesn't make it into my notes. What I do is just immediately go to my organizational system and apply it there. And, you know, it's just like immediately use it.
What's it called? What's the book called?
It's a book by Dan Kennedy. It's called No BS Time Management for Entrepreneurs. It's his part of like a system, and he's a pretty intense dude. He only has a fax machine. Doesn't have email.
Interesting.
Doesn't have phones. Yeah, doesn't have phone. Doesn't have social media. Doesn't have anything. What he does, like clients have to, like if clients want to meet with him in person, you know, they have to fly him to them in a private plane, or else come to him. So it's like, I'll come to you, but you have to pay for this private flight, or you can just come to me.
Interesting.
And they're like, yeah, right. And they're like, well, I guess it would be easier for me to just fly to you. And he's like, perfect. You know, it saves a whole bunch of time. So he's a little bit, well, extremely intense. But I'm learning a lot from that book. And there's a few things already, well, many things that I may not enter them into my notes, but I'll immediately apply them. You know.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's interesting. And like, do you find yourself listening to specific types of books during specific seasons, or during the specific times of day? Like maybe at night you might listen to a fiction, whereas maybe in the day or going to the gym you're listening to a nonfiction? Or like, do you try to like using the time management systems you might be learning, like do you try to like segment what type of books you're listening to or reading when?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think, you know, more people should read several books at once. I think that's an underutilized strategy.
Why do you think that? Just not to interrupt, but why do you think people should read multiple at once?
Well, it allows you to not be stuck on any one book. So sometimes like it's just the wrong time and place, like you said. There's certain books that like I'm just not in the mood for right now. Say I'm reading, like I just finished a poetry book by Charles Bukowski, one of my favorite poets. But I'm not always in the mood to read poetry. And if that was the only book that I was reading, there's a much higher likelihood of me saying, well, I don't want to read that right now, so I'm not going to read at all. Whereas if I have, you know, several books, you know, and so at night it'll be more fiction. I'm reading a Haruki Murakami novel called The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle right now, and it's perfect for, you know, bedtime reading. So I wind down, I turn off everything, I don't answer any messages, and I read, and it's perfect for winding down. But then in the morning, you know, maybe I'm in the mood for like, all right, I'm gonna get after this day, I'm gonna like attack this time management book and see what I can use, you know. So it's different, you know, different things.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've seen myself. Yeah, go ahead.
And what we were talking about earlier, you know, reading, like taking a book with you. You know, if you're only reading one book, and it's a physical book, and it's just like it's huge or something, or just unwieldy, I guess, and you can't take it with you for some reason, but you can take your phone. if you're reading two books, one on your phone and one physical version, you can always read. And I think it's so underutilized as a strategy. You can just get so much more reading done that way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I totally get what you mean. It's like, oh, I'm just not in the mood for this specific book. It's kind of heavy. I just might not read then.
Exactly.
Like, oh, that's a bit of a cop-out. You could be reading something else.
Right. Yeah. Well, I put it this way to people, like when you were in school, you didn't take like a month of math classes and then a month of English. You had, math class in the morning and then English class in the afternoon, so you can handle it. Like and again, like the capacity of your mind is greater than a lot of people give it credit for. And like you can handle additional demands.
Yeah, so. That's true. Yeah, I think I'm reading, I guess, like maybe 4 books at once, all audio versions, but yeah, trying to take notes, and yeah, it's like, if I'm in the mood for a nonfiction religious style book or a scientific book or a fiction book. I guess it just depends on my mood, and that's a good point.
What are you listening to now?
It's the book called Boundaries. You may have heard of it. It's like
possibly.
It's like a book. It has a Christian kind of tint to it, but my counselor recommended it to me. It's like it helps you kind of understand the psychology of different people's personalities in regards to setting boundaries for themselves. It's like who is
Gotcha.
good at saying no, who is not as good at saying no, who's bad at hearing no, who's bad at hearing yes, or those kind of like boundary problems, I guess. Yeah, I'm reading that, and then I'm reading also just $100 Million Leads by Hormozy. You've probably heard of that.
Did you go to the live launch of the book?
I wish I did. I had I had an engineering exam, it's like a fundamental engineering exam that day, that time, but that's okay. Did you go to it?
I was in the airport on my way home from my hernia surgery that I just had, and I was just sitting in the airport. It was a Saturday. Just had my airport beer and my book, and I had Hormozy doing his book launch.
Nice.
It was good.
Yeah, that's good. And
you may also like C.S. Lewis or who else? Chesterton. I don't know if you've read any of those guys.
In regards to Christianity, or in regards to
yeah, somewhat. I mean, that's why I thought of them. Mm-hmm. There's a Chesterton book. It's one of my favorite novels of all time, and it's called The Man Who Was Thursday, and it's a Christian allegory, and it's really, really a spectacular book. I highly recommend it. And C.S. Lewis, he has of course he wrote the Narnia series, but he has a book called The Reading Life. And it's excellent. It's really short, but it's just a collection of his observations about reading, and he just says some phenomenal things in there. I think you might really like it.
What would you say some of the big lessons from either one of those are? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah. Oh man, so the Reading Life, he's all about like fairy tales and stuff like that. And this is from memory, so it might not be exact, but he says, when I was a child, I used to be sort of ashamed of reading fairy tales, and I'd hide them. But now that I'm an adult, I read them openly, and it's just like, when you grow up, you put away childish things, including the desire to be seen as really grown up. So it's just I love that quote, and he was a brilliant dude. Apparently, and this I learned in that book too. Apparently, he could you could give him the page, or you could start him off on basically any passage in Paradise Lost by John Milton, and he could finish it. Apparently, he memorized Paradise Lost, which is insane. Yeah, so just a brilliant dude, and in the Narnia series, I mean, it's for younger adults. You think well, how smart could this guy be? He was brilliant, just brilliant.
Man, yeah, I've heard of Mere Christianity by him as well as another deep one.
Yeah,
possibly.
Yeah,
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess this is kind of a question of are there any books where you're maybe a top 2 or 3 or 4 books where it's this impacted me so much, and I look back on it so regularly. You kind of mentioned about how the 48 Laws of Power was kind of pivotal. Do you have any other books where you're man, every person should read this, or I'm so glad I read this kind of mentality?
You mean 300 or 400, or 3 or 4?
I know, but is there a way to rank order? What is at the peak of that?
Oh man, there are a few. I won't. There's so many that I won't go too deep into all of them.
Sure.
Infinite Jest was one of them for sure. David Foster Wallace. It's a hugely complicated book. But what you want to talk about geniuses. Like David Foster Wallace was definitely one of them. Now, okay, so that book it's based on Hamlet. Lots of people know that. Like the characters sort of mirror people in that play. And now I'm not a math person, but apparently there's a mathematical structure called Sierpinski's gasket, and it's a bunch of triangles sort of extended outwards or like going outwards. That's a gross oversimplification. But apparently the book, like the novel, is structured like a Sierpinski's gasket. Like that's like the thing. And it's about 1,000 pages with like hundreds of pages of footnote of endnotes, and some of the endnotes have their own footnotes. Like it's a like insanely complicated book with like 100+ characters, but it's brilliant, and it's like simultaneously the saddest and funniest book that I've ever read, which is like, pretty impressive. Yeah, like it's phenomenal. Fahrenheit 451 is another absolute favorite. If you love books, this is like, even if you don't necessarily recommend or don't necessarily read science fiction. Fahrenheit 451. It's like a love letter to people who love books. Basically, it's what it says on the book jacket, I think. So that's a really exciting one too. It's like definitely very memorable. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell is really good too. Interestingly, there's so many. I just named a bunch of fiction, so maybe nonfiction. Sure. Meditations, of course, we talked about that. Marcus Aurelius. I loved the book by Alan Watts. The Outsider by Colin Wilson. Mentioned that. Oh, geez. In terms of like business books, like personal development, Brian Tracy, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, which is a really fun name to say, but all of their books are really, really helpful. And they're the guys that I read when I was like, again, just working these overnight 12-hour shifts, like minimum wage, and they were all talking about doing more than that for which you were paid. Looking for opportunities to go above and beyond. How, like, one of the sort of dumb quotes that I like quite a bit, it's like, it's never crowded along the extra mile. I think that's Brian Tracy. So, and like those sort of became my sort of a part of my operating system. And one thing that Ziglar used to say all the time is, and Rohn too, I think, you can get virtually anything you want in life as long as you help enough other people get what they want. And that's also like a guiding philosophy of mine. So far. And then there are writers, like brilliant philosophers like Martha Nussbaum. I really like her books. And Simone Weil, French philosopher. Not a whole lot of people know about her. Just so many great nonfiction books.
Man. Yeah, it's cool to see you just kind of spit off so many and like have like the name and the author just kind of memorized, and just some people, it seems like they don't have the greatest memory. But I was actually going to ask, kind of just a little tangent off this, like, do you feel like in going down this route of reading 1,000+ books has improved your memory / improved your literacy / improved your ability to articulate information, write information, etc.?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not entirely sure whether it's improved my memory per se. Like I don't know enough to say. But in there's an excellent book it's called On Writing by Stephen King. It's one of his few nonfiction books, and it's about his writing process. And like the first half of it is autobiographical, and it's like just like exciting and funny. But what he says, like if you want to, basically he says the best writers ever, they all, like to a person, like they read a lot and they write a lot. So you just basically do a lot of reading and a lot of writing. So yes, it's definitely improved the way I write and my proficiency in that, and really, like improving your vocabulary is a good way of reading faster, because if you learn more words, then when you come across words that you don't know, that's going to happen less frequently and less frequently as you go along. So eventually you're going to know like way more words, and you won't have to stop and start and look up certain words and, oh, well, what does that mean? And then go back to the beginning of you're going to read a whole lot faster. So yeah, reading, it just improves so many different things. And especially you combine that with like going out and living your actual life and it's like allowing both of those things to inform each other, man, yeah. It's one of the best things that you can do. And I never force it on anyone. Like some people just, will not read. I don't think they're worse people, but I see I see what it's done for me. And if I can sort of make people realize that, that same thing could happen for them if they read more, that's really what I'm about.
Yeah, that's awesome goal. And it's cool to see you just documenting the process too. It's like I was taking a look into your Stairway to Wisdom and your Patreon, and just taking a look into like how it's like, it seems like you wrote pretty significantly big sized, what's the right word here, summaries of these books. It's like you spent a lot of time reading, and then you spent a lot of time writing, and it's like, I don't know, I can't think of many people that have wrote that many huge summaries of it. Like you could like go to Google and see like a 2-paragraph summary, but it's like this guy, he's been like, it's not like, and like this is before ChatGPT too. So it's like, you're truly just putting in that work of just like writing and thinking and reading. And I find that really cool, because over the past few years, like I got really influenced by Peterson, and he's like, the reason why you write is not to get an A on your paper. It's so that you can learn how to speak, and so that you can learn how to articulate, and so that you can learn how to like convince other people about the world and about what your mind is. And so it's like, that's what I kind of have been trying to do with this podcast. Every time beforehand, like I journal many questions, and I also every day try to write a lot of thoughts down, and I'm also trying to reading. Like I'm trying to do the big three, write, read, speak. But it seems like it's awesome to see you like surpassing me heavily in regards to how much information you're reading, writing. And I'm like, it's just every day I'm like, I'm excited to write and read and speak more about my writings and readings. So yeah, it's awesome.
I love that. That's perfect. And we're talking about rereading books, and 12 Rules for Life is actually, I have it right here,
nice.
right here in front of me. It's the only book that I've read 5 times,
wow.
including once read by him. Like I listened to him read the audio version first before I read it myself. And it's brilliant. And I don't know how many pages of notes that I have on this book, just like a dozen or more. It's just, man, it's amazing.
Totally, man. One of my favorite rules from that is like, assume the person you're speaking to knows something you don't. And it can, it can apply to this kind of conversation in life, but it can also apply to like any book that you have back there. It's like, it's because you're kind of having a conversation with the writer of it. And it's like, just if you're curious, you're going to learn in life. And it's like, if you're willing to keep admitting that you don't know that much and that there's more out there to learn, you're just going to become way wiser as a person. And it seems like that's what's been happening to you. And it's awesome to see that.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, there's never a point when I think that I know a lot. There was before I started reading books.
Fair enough.
That was when I knew that I thought I was pretty smart at that point. And then I read about 100 books, and then I realized I was an idiot. So, yeah. But... And it never ends. I mean, it's just like, I'll read, 5,000 eventually, hopefully. And, then I'll realize that there's so much more beyond that I have no idea. And, nobody has it all figured out. One of my favorite things, like, in Tim Ferriss's book, Tools of Titans, the foreword was written by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And, the very first word of the foreword, he says, "I am not a self-made man." And, a lot of people say, well, Arnold was, self-made. He did everything himself. And he says it right, like the first sentence, I am not a self-made man. And, there were the people that supported him, the books that he read, the opportunities that were available, just the, people helping him. Like nobody does it themselves. And there's plenty of people way smarter than myself, and they've written books encapsulating their entire lifetime of wisdom and learning. And you can go to the library or go, to iBooks, and you can just get it virtually for free. And it's like the means of learning are readily available. It's the will to learn that's scarce.
That's really well said. It's like back in the day, reading was for the wealthy and the elites. It's like libraries were not easy to access, and you needed to be kind of rich. And now it's like, go ahead.
I have another book recommendation for you. It's The Library Book by Susan Orlean, and it's about this one library in Los Angeles, the LA Central Library, and it burned down in 1986. And it was arson, so somebody set fire to this library, and the guy's name was like Harry Peake, I think. That I don't know if they ever proved that he did it, but anyway, the book is about that library and it burning down, and just like about what the library meant to that city. But it's about all libraries everywhere, and it's a really spectacularly well done book. Like, she does an amazing job on it, and actually I was in an airport one time in the bookstore, and I saw the library book, and I grabbed it immediately. And one sort of funny thing that I just remembered from that book is Ray Bradbury. He lived around that area, and his books, including Fahrenheit 451, kind of ironically burned in the library fire. So readers of Fahrenheit 451 would find that funny.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's like you're saying there's a big lack of will. I don't know if that's a big lack of will, but there's like literacy rates I think are pretty low. I should have honestly researched this beforehand, but I think it's like the average American has a 6th grade reading level is kind of what I was hearing, and I'm like, I wouldn't be too surprised by that, just based off how many people, like when you're walking down the street and you ask someone, so what's the last book, how many books have you read in the last 12 months? It's like, I would guess an average answer of 1 to 0, but maybe I'm wrong, but that's just cut from my experience, and it's truly unfortunate. It's like, what do you do with someone who's not as interested in reading? Like, how do you try to convince them that, like, this is such a powerful tool for them? Like, I don't know the right answer for that, but, like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough because, like I said, I never like to force it on anyone. It's never from a position of, like, I've read all these books, therefore you should listen to what I say. It's always a suggestion. And even like recommending books, like I don't say like, oh, you have to read this. And it's like, I don't, it's tough. It's actually really difficult to recommend a book to someone that's going to be perfect for them. And it's like I can make recommendations. And people say that I make good book recommendations, but like, you can't force people to read. And one of the best pieces of advice basically is just to I think just to read what you love until you love to read. And find something that you enjoy, like that first book that sort of lights that fire. Probably something a little less heavy than Crime and Punishment, but say like something easy like The Alchemist. I love that book. It's like a phenomenal little story. It's not difficult to read. I read it in one night, at my like overnight job. And it's sort of like you can read that really quickly. Like, it's not going to take you a long time. And if you like that, then you sort of get a taste of what reading can do and what it's like. And then you're like, I wonder what else I might like. And there are just so many. Like,
yeah. And also bringing it back to like the humility aspect, where it's like, once you kind of realize, it's like you hit this wall. I think it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect or something. It's like when you're first starting to learn, you're like thinking, oh, I'm so smart. Oh yeah, I know a lot. And then it's like, then you start to like look over the horizon and be like, man, I don't even know. I could scratch the surface on a few things, but I can't. You see how deep things go, and then you realize that you're pretty ignorant. And it's like the idea of like Socrates, like I am wise because I know I don't know very much, or like, like I love that philosophy for life.
There's one of my favorite books. Actually, it's on the Stairway to Wisdom. I'll give you a free membership if you like. You can just have it.
For sure.
It's yours.
Great.
It's a biography of Socrates. It's called Socrates in Love by Armand Danjour, and he's a brilliant scholar. He's a professor at Oxford, I think, and he wrote the music for the Olympics in Greece when it was, I think, 2004 or something like that. He wrote the music, and he wrote this really cool biography of Socrates, and it goes through all like the original sources, because like he never wrote anything himself. He was actually sort of against writing. He thought it was like gonna Yeah, he thought like people wouldn't remember things if they learned to read instead. So he saw this as like a threat to like oral history or oral tradition. Yeah, but like there's a whole bunch. Like, man, there's so many interesting things about that book. Like, you never think of Socrates as a teenager, but at one point he definitely was. Like, there was a point when Socrates was like 16 years old. You know, it's like, what was that Socrates like? You know, and like, there's no answer. I mean, there's nothing really about that time in his life. But it's a really interesting biography.
Man, interesting.
Yeah, highly recommend.
Yeah, and that's kind of where. That's like one of my goals with, well, the people I like to hang out with are the people who are like, they ask deep questions based off that kind of rule I was talking about. Like, they ask questions because they want to learn, and also people that are willing to admit that they're wrong or willing to admit they don't know. Man. And like, you always know when you're in a room with someone and they're like, they're the smartest person in the room, they know it, and they're totally not afraid to tell you all about it. And you're like, I wonder why you're saying all this, because I know as a human, you physically can't. You don't have enough time on this earth to really know much. So it's like, why are you boosting yourself up there when in reality we're all just mortal humans who learn little bits here and there for only 100 years. You know, like, the world is too complicated for us all to really know much. And that's why I just try my best to like stay as humble as possible and like hang around with people that are willing to admit that they don't know. Yeah, it's like.
Yeah, two things to say about that. One, I was on. This is rare when it happens. It's bad that it's noteworthy when this happens. But I was on a video call with someone, just a new friend of mine from Twitter, and we had a lot in common. He runs a business, I run a business. So we're just like, yeah, let's get on the call. Let's talk. And his name is Vincent, great guy. And he one of the things that struck me about him, he asked so many questions about me and what I was doing, what I thought, you know, and he actually listened attentively for the answers. And then, of course, I would do the same thing, you know, because like I'm, you know, pretty good at, at listening to the answers, admitting when, you know, when there's, you know, like the Peterson thing, and assume that the person you're talking to knows something that you don't. And so it was a fantastic conversation because we were both like that. You know, we both wanted to know what the other person had, you know, and it's rare, you know, it's so rare to find someone like that.